Hello, welcome to the Week 4 lecture, Refining Our Research and Documentation Processes. Before we do any research, we need to choose a topic that fits into the course theme for this term, fulfills the paper assignment, and is in some way interesting to you as the author. Brainstorm about the topic so that you have some ideas about what to say in the paper, and make a brief preliminary outline of your thoughts so that you're ready to do your research. Then begin your research at the library. Ideally, we could go in person to the library, which is extremely productive. And we could also meet up with the research librarians who are a fabulous resource and have helped me in the past with my writing projects. This is the Pius Library homepage though, and this is an image of that homepage, at least at the instant that I took this image. And you can do a sleuth search on the homepage of the Pius Library, and you can look up books, journal articles, and digital collections as sources. Anything that you find through the SLU library is bound to be a good source as opposed to the internet research, which could give us any number of bad and not credible sources. Begin your research at the library, as I said, and there are School for Professional Studies study guides that you can find at this link. And I will be posting the lecture as a PowerPoint presentation as well so that you can click on the links or you can look at the presentation at your own pace. And not only can you use the study guide to find research material for your papers, you can also contact the SPS librarian by email or phone. And Pius Library also has a chat feature if you need help with your research. So you can get some help with your research even while you're doing it at home or at any other site, such as another library. You found some good sources. Now what? Some sources provide basic facts or statistics. These sources are probably best used for the documented facts and statistics, but probably aren't sufficiently interesting to need direct quotes. This non-quoted information still needs an in-text citation, but does not need to be enclosed in quote marks. And so here is some information from this book here, and I got the cover image from Amazon, but it's a book that I own as well. And the example is that Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd were engaged in 1840, which is an interesting statistic, but we don't need to have that quoted word for word. And this is summarized and paraphrased, so it's not the same words as the source and therefore does not need quote marks. But I still need to document where I got this information because I would never know off the top of my head when Abraham Lincoln and his wife got engaged. So now, some sources provide context and historical information. An entire chapter or paragraph from these sources can be summarized and not quoted word for word because a lot of times we'll just see a lot of information that we could boil down to something much more manageable and not have to waste paper or waste space in our paper for all that detail. And so then the summarized information needs to be accompanied by an in-text citation. So this is an example of summarized information. Abraham Lincoln grew up in poverty. He was raised in a log cabin. The death of his mother when he was only 9 made a deep impression on his life. And so this is summarized from a source with the author name of Schlesinger, and it was published in 2003. And as you'll see later on the references list for this slideshow, we have more information about this source there, but we only need the last name of the author and the year of publication and a page number if the source had page numbers, but this one does not. I found it as an electronic source. Paraphrasing a passage from a source. Too many direct quotes in a paper can result in a paper that does not sound like your voice. Too many direct quotes also indicate that you do not know how to paraphrase and summarize material from your sources. So a paraphrasing example, this is the original wording from the source. Quote, with quote marks, Lincoln's words made such an impression on the multitude that after Douglas made his closing remarks, there was only a scattering of applause. And that is from a paper book with an author's last name, a year of publication, and a precise page number where this quote was found. So this is what the in-text citation looks like. One way to paraphrase the previous passage is, once Abraham Lincoln had spoken, the crowd was so impressed with his style and substance that they gave scant applause for the conclusion Douglas offered at the end of the debate. And so this is my paraphrase and also my interpretation of what the previous passage meant. But I still document where that material that I paraphrased came from, because I would not have known this. I was not at that debate. I am not really quite that old, and so I was not there, and I needed to get that from a source, and I still document it. And using a well-written direct quote to make your paper even better can be done like this. The family life of Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln was strained by both his frequent absences as well as her increasingly neurotic behavior, and this is all me up until where I say their son Robert felt the situation keenly, and as a teenager and now this is quoted from the book, quote, had to take his father's part in comforting his mother in her irrational fears as well as in her increasingly frequent rages. And I do have my complete APA citation here, and I have an ellipsis here, which I'll explain on the next slide. That ellipsis left out this chunk of text here from the source. I didn't really think that of tinkers, burglars, and thunder really added anything to the quote, so I took it out and replaced it with an ellipsis. And then when you leave out information that does not change the meaning of the quote, you can use an ellipsis, but you must not leave out information that changes the meaning of the quote. That is basically dishonest. So it would be something like, I don't know if anybody remembers Richard Nixon, but if you were quoting his speech where he said, I am not a crook, and you took out the not and replaced it with an ellipsis, that would be a dishonest way to take information out of that quote. Long quotes. Sometimes you have a quote that is long. Now, if your quote is 3 pages long in a 4-page paper, obviously that is too long of a long quote. But if you are quoting several lines of poetry or more than 100 continuous words from a source, we should use long quote format. We should introduce a long quote with a sentence explaining what it is, like right here is kind of a way to where we would put our sentence describing the quote. And then it still needs an APA citation. In this case, from our example from the Purdue Owl, we have the author's last name in the sentence coming up to the quote and then the page number here. If you didn't put the author's last name up here, then the author's last name would be needed down there as well. And the Purdue Owl has more information about long quotation formatting. And then get extra mileage from your research. Do not put 2 quotes next to each other. I believe we've discussed making a quotation sandwich, and so that is one way to prevent this, because if you put 2 quotes next to each other, your voice gets lost, and also it starts looking like your paper isn't so much a paper but just a compilation of your research information. And then discuss the meaning of all of the material that comes from research in your own words and in the context of your paper. Make the quote fit in smoothly and talk about why you're using that information. And do not let the research information take over your paper. The paper should be mostly your words, ideas, and opinions. Your professor wants to hear from you, not just your sources. They could just go read that information, but you have a lot to add to it. And your research material is there for you. You are in charge. So this is the reference list for the 2 sources that I used for the quotes and for the quotes and for the summarizations and paraphrases inside the presentation here. And this is the Epstein source, and it's a book, and it has all of the elements of a book. And this next source was a book, but it was found on the SLU website or the SLU library databases, and so I have put in the elements of a book, but we also have where it was retrieved from. And so this is based on how all these different sources would be documented on the Purdue Owl. So the Purdue Owl comes in very handy, and we also have our handbook. So there is a a good reason to document carefully, and you want to look everything up every time you write a paper and when you do your references page. Don't try to memorize all this. I actually had to go to the Purdue OWL to make sure that my references page looked correct too. So I hope you have a good week, and I'm looking forward to reading everyone's papers and discussing issues on the discussion board. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.